Welcome to FPB's Meet the Candidates. This Cable 10 series allows you, the voter, to get a closer look at the candidates and the issues that are important to our community. This is leading up to the general election, where voting starts early on October 13th and goes until Election Day on November 3rd. For our interviews, we took questions from social media and via email. So today we're going to talk about the shakeup in city government, how COVID is affecting our community, confronting social injustice on a local level, and much more. So we have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. And I'll introduce today's guest. It's Harry Carver, and he is a candidate for City Commission. Thanks for being here, Harry.
I'm glad to be here. Appreciate y'all doing this.
Absolutely. So for those who are just meeting you today, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and why you've decided to run for City Commission?
I've been, involved in the community for a long time with various nonprofits from downtown Frankfort to the Y, volunteering at the Grand, being a part of starting our own community fund here, which is an endowment that hopefully in a few years will be generating grants for local nonprofits to help them along. And watching, when you watch how local government operates and how perhaps some elected officials comport themselves and what the decisions they make, it becomes difficult to criticize without being able to say, okay, I'm willing to do something about it. And so that's why I decided to throw my hat in the ring this year. I think it's important that people, take responsibility and take ownership of their government. And I know that it's not, elected office is not for everybody, but, I think it's an important thing. And I just thought this was a good time to do it.
Right. Well, you talked a little bit about your experience, but why don't you tell us how you think your experience has prepared you to be on the City Commission?
Well, I've spent a number of years in local government, or not in local government, in state government, but as in my last job in state government, I worked for the Department for Local Government, so I was able to work with local governments across the state, have a pretty good understanding of the challenges they face, and also where where they can go after resources that perhaps we don't have on the local level. I know that revenue is tight in with the pandemic going on. Our revenue forecasts are much bleaker, and we need to figure out how to do more with less, but also to look at other opportunities for funding to move things forward. So having worked with that, with the Department of Local Government, having a better understanding of local government, also I'm now since leaving government, have been in the private sector doing real estate sales and appraisal. So I have a pretty good understanding of some of the challenges that the business community faces locally, and what the kind of things that we might do to move forward, and also a really clear understanding of what's amiss with our housing situation here and how we really need to address housing as part of our overall plans to move forward.
Okay. Since we last spoke, the City Commission has fired our city manager, Keith Parker. So I just want to ask you, why can't Frankfort keep a city manager on a long-term basis?
I think that that it's been pretty clear that some of our leadership, and particularly the mayor, is not a believer in the city manager form of government. And and that's what we have here in Frankfort. And it's I think it could and should work well for us. The commission needs to set broad policy goals, articulate where we need to go and perhaps how we get there, and then rely on a competent staff to implement those goals and make things happen. You can't micromanage staff. You have to allow them to do their jobs. And I think that that's where we have been, where we've made our mistakes in the past and allowed our leadership to, behave this way. And we've had, a revolving door of city managers. I think this is unfortunate. I don't think it's served us well at all. If they're in this particular situation with Keith, who by all accounts was doing a good job, I don't think I heard, very few complaints, if any at all. It was easy to work with. He had a clear, big picture understanding of things, and he also relied on his staff. I think we have a great staff at City Hall, and I think that a good manager supports their staff and relies on them, and he was doing that. If the commission had a reason to fire him, I think that, the citizens, we should have known what that was. I mean, when you have one of the commissioners that doesn't even know why the commission fired the city manager, I think we've got problems. And I think the whole process, just pointed to a lack of transparency, which we can't afford to have. Government needs to be open. People need to understand what their government's doing and feel that their elected officials are acting in their best interest.
Sure. Well, we talked about the form of government that we have. According to the Kentucky League of Cities, only about 5% of Kentucky cities use the city manager plan. So what are the advantages of a city manager plan? And do you support that form of government, or do you think Frankfort should move to a mayor-council plan?
I think the city manager form of government is appropriate for Frankfort, for a city our size, and the require. I mean, we've got a pretty good sized government, and it's. I think that having a professional managed city government is important. Like I said, I think if you have a good engaged commission that sets the agenda, that's establishes our broad policy goals, you hire competent folks to implement them. I think one of our problems has been a lack of understanding, perhaps, of not only some of the elected officials, but our citizens. So, Libby Marshall did an op-ed piece in the paper recently and talked about how perhaps we need to take a good hard look at the city manager form of government and have, maybe, not maybe, but have, hopefully in a process, have people understand it better, and then really in the end decide, is that what really makes the most sense for us? But without having that, broader discussion with widespread participation so folks really understand, I think it's hard to, to talk really about changing.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking for a new city manager. Do you think that's something that the current mayor and commissioners should fill the position, or wait until the new leadership is in place?
I think they should wait. Mm-hmm. I think that, as I recall, that's what the previous commission did 2 years ago. And I think it would be appropriate for them to defer to the new commission to hire the city manager.
So what should the city commission look for in a new city manager?
I think you need someone that understands how the city should work, and understands where the different potential sources of revenue are, what we need to do, and how creative we have to be to make projects happen, to move us forward. We're entering into a really challenging time. I think that with what's been going on with state government and business in general, with folks working at home, and this has been happening over time, but not to the scale that it's happening now. So what we're seeing is, particularly for us, as the state moves forward and recognizes that not everybody's going to be coming to the office every day, that they don't need as much office space. And if the state starts consolidating, which I imagine they will, into state-owned offices, then we're going to have a lot of empty buildings around town that we need to figure out what to do with. And I think whoever the next city manager is, and the next commission, we're going to have to address this, and we're going to figure out how we can best adapt these buildings for future use so that they don't remain empty, so that they generate the tax revenue that the city needs. So that's just one of the things. I think somebody that, when you're looking for somebody to be the city manager, somebody that is, creative but responsible too, that understands that we have limited resources and we have to spend them in the most effective way that we possibly can.
Sure. So obviously this whole thing has been a troubling issue for the community. So if elected, what would you suggest the city commission do to boost public confidence in government?
I think the city commission needs to act in a more transparent manner. I mean, you can't cut deals behind the scenes and expect people to have confidence in their government. As I just referred to the financial situation that we're in, and how what's going to happen over time in the near future, that doesn't look good. And, when you're cutting deals behind the scenes to fund legacy projects rather than really looking out for the future and to provide a good sound footing for the city as we move through this difficult time, I think that's it's unfortunate. It's not responsible. So I think first and foremost that, the new commission, we need to be transparent, and people need to have a clear understanding of where we're going and the decisions are made and why they're made.
Yeah. So if elected, would you support the appointment of a citizens advisory committee tasked with the identification of opportunities to improve the functionality of city government, its overall structure and roles and responsibilities of those elected and those appointed?
I never really thought about how, I mean, I'm not opposed to that idea. I think that we need to figure out a way to get people more engaged in their local government. And um, it's not, people have limited time available. I know that folks, small kids, it's hard to carve out time to do this, that, and the other thing, and really spend a lot of time. So however we do it, we have to do it in a way that people can be involved in that works around schedules, that works easier for people to participate and to get a better understanding of how things work. And we need to find out what people's expectations of their government are. And I think that, however we choose to do that, whatever format that takes, that is important. I think it's very important.
Sure. Well, moving on, here in Franklin County, we have more than 500 positive reported cases of COVID-19. Do you feel like the city has taken an effective, aggressive role in controlling the spread? And what more can they do to help with that?
I think we've had good local leadership, and we've had good leadership on the state level in terms of addressing, the pandemic, the COVID virus. I think, we all have a responsibility as individual citizens. We talk a lot about what our rights are, but we have responsibility. We have responsibility to our neighbors, to the community, to behave and not engage in risky behavior, because it's not going to help, it's not going to help anybody for any number of reasons. I think, so in short, I think, our response has been appropriate so far. I think what we really need to be concerned about is how this all plays out and how we're going to be able to, get through that, both, financially and otherwise. I think that there are going to be many people in our community that are going to suffer even further, and more people are going to suffer as as our economic situation continues. And I'm worried about that. I think from a public health standpoint, I think we're responding appropriately, but I think, we have other issues that are resulting from this that we're going to have to address.
Yeah, well, that was one of my questions. 4 months ago, we discussed the looming economic crisis that this pandemic would bring. So we're now seeing the negative impact, for example, occupational taxes. So if elected, do you have any ideas just right off of how we can address this crisis in our community? Budget-wise, what do we need to do?
I think first and foremost, we need to be fiscally responsible. We don't need to be spending money that we perhaps do not have. I think we need to look at, how we're going to move forward, how we're going to position ourselves to grow out of this. It's interesting now, we have very limited inventory for housing. People that want to buy houses and move to Frankfurt, or there's nothing available. So how does housing and construction play into how we build ourselves out of this? What I talked about earlier, all this excess office space. What kind of strategies can we use to fill these buildings? Do they need to be repurposed? I think that we need to be careful about how we move forward with the sewer that's going to go to, Evergreen Road, the south area of the county. I think it's important we have a responsibility to those people in that part of the county that they don't have sewage floating around in their yard and their streams, that we take care of that. But it's a result of bad planning decades ago, and we don't want to do more, harm. So when we send the sewer out there to take care of them, that doesn't mean that we continue to build without paying attention to how that impacts the developed parts of the area, because as time goes on, we're going to have more and more empty buildings that we need to worry about. The people, when we talk about filling vacancies and, in abandoned buildings and empty buildings, it's not just downtown. It's drive up East Main Street, drive out Louisville Road, go out for Sales Road. We've got plenty of available properties that need to be reckoned with, and the city needs to have a strategy of how we're going to do these and how we're going to fill these and do that. So that's going to be an important part of our building out of this current situation.
Okay. Well, this summer, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, our country saw a rising movement in the calls for social justice. So my first question to you on this subject is, do Black Lives matter?
Absolutely. And I think that that for those of us that that are white, I think it's very difficult for us to imagine. It's hard to put ourselves in a position of an African American person walking down the street in any community in this country today, and for people to not understand that, or at least not attempt to understand that is I don't know. It's hard to fathom. I think that the unfortunate thing right now is the way that we can work our way out of this is folks to be together and to talk through it and have some very difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And I find it very difficult to have any conversation at all where I'm staring at you through this computer screen. And so, and I know there's ways and strategies that we're going to have to take now to bring people together. I know that the work that, that Ed Poe and others are doing here in town, with focus on race relations is important, and that we need to continue to move that forward. But I think that it's just a lot more difficult and challenging with our inability to gather in person and talk through some things, and really, because it's what it's going to take to recognize it and to recognize where each of us as individuals are coming from, and to work through our how we were raised and our own biases and perceptions of the world. And that's it's something that's best done live and in person.
Yes. So how do you feel the city rates currently when it comes to effectively addressing these social injustices?
I think that we're probably better off than a lot of places, but I still think that we've got a lot of, ground to make up.
Sure. So in the early summer, a group of young activists sponsored a march up Capitol Avenue in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. What can city leaders do to encourage more young people to get more civically engaged?
That's a challenge. I think that evening, that march was remarkable. The number of people that turned out, and the fact that it was young folks that organized it, and it just points to the fact that we can demonstrate, we can protest. It's a very important part of what we are in this country, and we can do it without violence and without being hateful and ugly. And I thought that was a particularly incredible evening for the community, and I appreciate their efforts to organize. And how do you get more young people to do that? I guess the first thing is recognizing that they are doing things, and that it's not just cranky old people that are running the show. That we need to to embrace that. And again, it's as people are starting their adult lives, it's a time when they're challenged by a lot of things, and that finding the time to do things, and those young people that take the time to organize and do and try to move issues forward, I think that's important. And whatever we can do as a community to support that, and to to recognize their importance, and that what they're doing does mean something, that that we need to pay attention and use it as a rallying point.
Okay. Well, we have a big piece of property downtown that everybody's looking at and focused on. So let's talk TIF for a minute.
Okay.
Can you explain to our viewers how the TIF would work, and if it's something that you would support?
Yes, to try to do a project of the scale that we're facing downtown with parcels B and C, and now with the old warehouse on Broadway, that has been something that we've struggled with for years, trying to get a developer to come in and take that on. That one of the things that makes a project like this or likely to happen is to have some sort of public support for infrastructure improvements. That that these kind of developments don't happen on their own and of the scale. So, excuse me, TIF, the tax increment financing, is a vehicle to pay for these infrastructure improvements, whether it's parking garages, whether it's reopening Washington Street so we can reestablish the grid of streets downtown to get them better flow for people and pedestrians. The tax increment financing, it's a mechanism where it captures future revenue that's going to occur because of the development, and uses that revenue to pay the debt on the infrastructure that has been done to support the development. To get there, to get to a TIF district, there's a process, and we're going through it now. Our local governments have to vote on it. We have to go through a public hearing. We have to go through this public process. And then when we get to the state level, because part of this is not just future local tax revenues, but it's also future state tax revenues. So they have to buy into this, and so there's another level of review. And we just have to make very clear and make sure that our infrastructure investments and the level that they are can be supported by the tax revenue that we'll have to pay the debt service on that. So I think it's a great mechanism, and it's an appropriate mechanism, and we've never had a project of this scale before where it would really work in Frankfurt or should work in Frankfurt. So I'm excited about the opportunities because I really don't think that we're going to get or would get the type of development that we're looking for without it. So I think we need to move through the process. We need to be mindful of those things and move forward.
Okay. As funding has been reduced for DFI and KCDC, do you think this minimizes the effectiveness of their missions to attract and support businesses here in Frankfurt? And what can the city do to support these agencies?
I think, obviously any reduction in funding makes folks work more challenging. I think that this is a time for us to start talking about how our local economic development efforts, or even our tourism efforts, are structured. We started talking about this a few years ago and taking a look at how Danville and Boyle County operate and how Bardstown and Nelson County. There's two examples of communities that have a very different structure on how that they go about economic development. They have a broad umbrella where all these entities fall under it, whether it's industrial development, whether it's economic development, whether it's their downtown programs and their tourism efforts. They all fall under one umbrella so that they have a coordinated effort. You also have economies of scale on things you can save on administrative costs and overhead by housing folks together and having a structure. Not that our folks don't talk to each other, but having a formal structure where there's different boards that are responsible to each other that that move us forward collectively. And I think that's something that's a conversation we need to be having as to really sharpen our efforts for economic development.
Okay. If elected, how would you involve business leaders in board appointments and other decision-making processes in the community?
I think, the way we do it now, it tends to be that the mayor, puts out the nominees for various boards and commissions, that the city has, and then the commission approves them. I think that there's probably a way to throw that open a little bit more to involve more people to, really solicit citizen engagement in the process, because there's folks that perhaps we're overlooking that, are not obvious, people that would be likely to serve. I think that the business community needs to step forward and, offer folks up as, that would be appropriate for the various boards and commissions, just as anybody that has an interest in serving on board or commission. There should be a clear way for them to put themselves forward to be considered. And, and we need to look at how, the boards and commissions are balanced to make sure that, that we have a good cross-section of the community serving on those boards so that they can do what's in the best interest of Frankfurt overall.
Okay. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but what is your plan to address Frankfurt's low-income housing problem? And if elected, would you support a city ordinance which adopts the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act like other cities have done?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that we have sort of been a little bit blind to, because we've always thought of Frankfurt as an affordable place to live. That housing is relatively affordable, and and that's just not only when you buy a house, but rents are relative, and that's really not the case, and it's changing dramatically, obviously, in the with the housing market. But I think that we have probably neglected on the lower end of the housing market in terms of housing affordability for those that are the most in need. I don't know, I'm not really, several years ago when the housing authority sold those apartments right behind downtown, which recently, the Danish Farm rehabbed, and it's recently been resold. I think we lost a number of affordable housing units that were in the mix here. with the recent sale of the building in South Frankfort, again, we faced that where they were affordable units, and, where do those people go, and how do we as a community come up with a strategy for taking care of them? Somebody quoted a number the other day, and I don't recall what it was, but I was just startled by it, of how many homeless folks that we have here in town. And how are we going to house those in, most need? So many of our homeless folks have serious mental health and drug abuse issues, and, need permanent housing with appropriate services so that they can continue to be housed. And so I think when we talk about housing and we talk about affordable housing, I'm talking about affordable housing on all levels for all folks, that we need, and that's, that we need to have a big community discussion about that. And that's whether there's a task force that's appointed by the city and the county to come together and come up with a strategy, because there's so many different levels to this, and building and housing can certainly help our local economy if we take it seriously and move forward and figure out how to fund it and do it. But we're just going to have to. It's one of those things that we're going to have to bite the bullet and do, because it's way too important for us. And if we're going to, if we're going to attract people to live here, then we can't, then they have to have a place to move. They have to have a home to move into if we want them to, to come here. And right now, that's not the case. And for our own folks, with the people that are of a certain age that are looking to downsize, there are limited opportunities. And if we provide those opportunities, then their single family houses and suburban neighborhoods are going to be freed up for families to move into. So, there's it's just all interconnected, and there's a lot of moving parts to housing. And I think that from, all up and down the line, for affordable housing for the most in need, up to perhaps, like talk about boomers downsizing, probably, their financial need is not great, but they have a place to go is important. So it's, when you look at it from, top to bottom, it's something that's, that's all interconnected and needs to be addressed.
Okay. What can city leadership do to foster a more partnering relationship with Kentucky State University? And would you support the expeditious completion of the Thoroughbred Trail, which is the one that leads to Kentucky State?
This is a very difficult issue, because we've talked about it for years, and and a couple of years ago when we did On the Table, that was one of the issues that came out of that, as people wanted to see a better connection between the city and the university. And one of the ways we tried to start talking about it was, how do you make Frankfort a college town, as opposed to, when you talk about improving relationships and things like that, people, their eyes roll and they glaze over, and you kind of, So we said, well, how do we make Frankfort a college town? We have a university here. It's an asset. How do we take advantage of it? How do we, get students involved in the community? How do we make ourselves more like a college town? Where are the faculty? What are they doing? How, So, several people went to, there's an national association, Town Gown, of communities with colleges and universities, where folks from the community as well as folks from the university go. And we had a number of people from Frankfurt went, and that we were fortunate enough that K-State sponsored and allowed, go when they went. But there was some lack of commitment on the university's part upon their return about them really talking and speaking publicly about it. I know one of the participants had wrote a very engaging report about, their experience and what we could possibly do. And it didn't seem to me, it was pretty clear that the university wanted control. And I think that this is a partnership, and it's got to be a partnership between the town and the community. And we've got to figure out how to do that, because it's to all of our advantage that we get along and that they are successful. Because if Kentucky State is successful, then the community will be successful and the city will be successful. And we have got to figure out a way. We've been talking about this for way too long. And again, this goes back to some of the issues that we were talking about earlier about race relations. And some of these things are going to be unpleasant conversations, but I think we're going to have them and, to do it. It's too important not to.
So do you support the completion of the trail?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It was, and that's another thing. It's like, it's frustrating, because so many of these things get tied up in weird bureaucratic hurdles that, that people aren't aware of. You've got federal money coming into it. It takes this, that, and these hoops to jump through, and things take, longer than perhaps you like for them to do. But no, I hope it's done soon. I think it's a great thing, and we need it. We need to start looking not just our linkages, our physical linkages to Kentucky State, but linkages all around the community, so people can get around town easier without being on the roads.
Okay. Well, we have run out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to you. I have many more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to you and let you address our viewers and tell them why you're the best candidate for the position and why they should vote for you.
Thanks. As I talked about earlier, I decided to run for commission because I really think that I have, the experience that we need to help move Frankfort forward, to serve on the commission. I feel that I get along well with others, that I, have worked in a collaborative role, and many of my experiences in the past, whether it was in state government or whether it was, working with community organizations here. So I have the time, and I think I have the temperament to serve. I think that I recognize what we need to do to move forward, that if we are ever going to attract investment here, attract people to live here, that our leaders have to be champions for the community. We have to behave responsibly, in this time when people can watch what we do from anywhere in the world. If they're watching our city commission meetings from, far away, they might question why they would want to come here. So I think that our elected officials need to behave accordingly, and that we need to have focused city commission meetings that get the job done and move forward. And our city elected officials and county elected officials need to be champions for the community. We need to be talking about why Frankfort's a great place to live, and why you need to come here to live, why you need to invest here. And that's what I plan on doing. And I certainly hope that I will have folks' support as I move towards that goal, and make sure that you are registered. You still have a couple more weeks to register if you haven't registered yet, and then to take advantage of the online portal so that you can get your ballots if you're not comfortable voting in person. And if you're worried about the U.S. mail, they will have boxes so that you can deliver them, without having to put it in the mail. But I would certainly appreciate the support, and I encourage everybody to participate. It's too important not to.
Well, thank you so much, Harry, for your time today. And I know our viewers appreciate hearing from you. I know I do. To our viewers, I want to say thanks for watching. It's important to get informed so that then you can grab your ballot or go vote early and voice your choice. So that's all for this time. We'll see you next time on Meet the Candidates.